Today, we're going to look at some survival stories that will have you questioning if you ever want to go back into the wilderness again. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. On February 19, 1979, a chartered plane carrying 11-year-old Norman Olstead Jr., his father, and his father's girlfriend were heading to Big Bear Mountain when they were caught in a winter storm. Unfortunately, this would lead them to crash into the San Gabriel Mountains. After they crashed, this 11-year-old boy, he kind of wakes up, he had blacked out, and he's screaming for his father. But he can't find him, and he thinks, okay, maybe my father's knocked out. But then he finds his father's girlfriend, Sandra, and he soon realizes his father is not blacked out. He didn't survive the crash, nor did the other men aboard. At this point, Sandra and the 11-year-old boy, Norman, are at an altitude of about 8,200 feet. Once they get to the realization that they're alone on this mountain and that the rest of the passengers are dead, they are absolutely terrified, and they're being pummeled with snow. There's now a snowstorm, the snowstorm that made them crash, and they're cold and they don't know what to do. For about the next 7 hours, Norman and Sandra would huddle under the wing of the airplane to try to stay warm. I'm sure at this point they were hoping that if they stayed put, a rescue team would come and get them. It's been 7 hours. They must know by now that the plane has crashed. So they stayed put for those 7 hours and they're just trying to stay warm. Eventually they realized that if they stayed there any longer, they would probably freeze. So they decided to make it down the mountain in search of help. Norman would detail how they started their descent down the mountain. He would later say, "I was just sliding down on my butt, and every time I got going too fast, I stuck a stick in the snow. Unfortunately, at some point, Sandra would slip down the chute and fall to her death." Norman was determined to get help. I'm sure at this point, the 11-year-old boy thought that maybe there were some survivors at the plane crash. Norman would continue this pattern of kind of sliding, stopping with a stick, sliding, stopping with a stick, for about 2 miles. Eventually, the 11-year-old boy would come to this meadow, and he'd follow a creek until he found a home. And this took him about 2 hours to accomplish. It turns out that the plane had crashed about 50 miles northeast of Los Angeles. From the time the plane crashed and until Norman got help, it was about a 9-hour ordeal. And this is an 11-year-old boy who just went through a terrible plane crash, and he knows that it's possible his father is dead, Sandra is dead, the other person flying with them, who was a flying instructor, is dead. And still he managed the strength to go and get help. Norman was, of course, rushed to the hospital where he was reunited with his mother. And during an interview, he said, "I'm a little bit achy, that's about it." Though the reporter noticed his face was puffy from several cuts and his right hand had been broken and in a cast. Norman would go on to say that at one point during his trek down the mountain, he saw a helicopter and he stood up and he's waving his arms trying to get them to help. And he said that he thought they saw him, but it turns out they didn't. He would say, "It looked like they saw me, but I guess they didn't, and they never came back. But I never gave up. Dad taught me to never give up." It turns out the plane crashed after striking a tree. Norman would say that he tried to wake his father up, but he never woke up. In 2009, Norman would write a book about this, and it became a bestseller. He's now married and is a father himself, and he still passes down the lessons that his father taught him, specifically, never to give up. A 23-year-old woman would go missing, and it turns out she accidentally plummeted 200 feet over a cliff in her car. On July 6, 2018, Angela Hernandez was driving along an oceanside cliff in California's Central Coast. As she's driving, she sees a small animal on the highway, and she swerves to miss it. Unfortunately, she would veer off the edge of a cliff and crash about 200 feet below, where the ocean meets this rocky beach that is largely isolated from those driving above it. She would go on to say, "The only thing I really remember after that was waking up. I was still in my car and I could feel water rising over my knees. My head hurt, and when I touched it, I found blood on my palms." She did note that the windows were rolled up and the power was out. She would say, I took off my seatbelt, found the multi-tool I kept near my front seat. I started hitting the driver's side window with it. Every bone in my body hurt. I can't even imagine what she's thinking at this point. She wakes up. She really has no idea what happened. She probably has some sort of concussion at this point, but she does see that she's been in an accident. Water is quickly filling up in her car, and she still has the strength and the whereabouts to get that multi-tool, break open the window, pull herself from the car, and swim to shore. After she gets to the shore, she just passes out. I'm sure at this point her body is in excruciating pain, and she doesn't know how long she was passed out for. She would say, when I woke up, it was still daylight, and it was only then that I had finally realized what had happened. I stood up onto my feet and noticed a huge pain in my shoulders, hips, back, and thighs. I saw nothing but rocks, the ocean, and a cliff that I knew I'd never be able to look over. I could see my car not too far from me, half washed up on the shore with the roof ripped off of it. What she didn't know is that she had fractured her ribs, her collarbone, and was losing air from one of her lungs. And for the next 7 days, she had to struggle to find help. At this point, she didn't have any shoes on. She only had socks, and so she's trying to walk around this really rocky area, and she's trying to be really careful because she's already in a lot of pain. And of course, this is California, so she's getting sunburnt in the process. She's becoming more dehydrated. She's starving. And of course, she has all of these injuries to her body. So she's walking around looking for help in this very isolated area and struggling immensely. She did, however, take a hose from her car, and she would catch water dripping from moss, rocks, and drink that. What she doesn't know is that people are out looking for her. Police officers are searching for her. They know that she was last on this cliffside, and because of the dense fog, they really can't see the wreckage. What's even more terrifying about this is as she's looking for help, she can look up and see cars driving by, but they can't see her. She's too far down below. So she is yelling and screaming for help, but nobody can hear her and nobody can see her. She would say, I could see cars driving across the cliff and felt like if I could yell just loud enough that one would hear or see me. That's all it would take to make it back to my family. Just one person noticing me. At nighttime, she would sleep and just imagine being rescued. And then 2 hikers looking for a fishing spot would stumble across her car. Although they didn't see any bodies or blood or anything like that, they decided to go looking just in case. As they're walking up the beach, they're kind of collecting items that had been flung from the car. And that's when they find this 23-year-old woman hidden in rocks. She had sought shelter and she was kind of just staying there and resting, and they stumbled upon her. She would later say that she screamed help and then got up as quickly as she could and ran over to this couple. She said that she was looking at these people and she didn't think they could believe their eyes as they're looking back at her. She said they acted incredibly quickly. They ran down the beach and up the trail to go find a man while she kind of stayed there. And obviously they gave her fresh water and things like that. They wanted to get her hydrated. This young woman is incredibly lucky to be alive. And really, she acted so quickly and so intelligently, busting out those windows, swimming to shore, looking for water, taking a hose from her car and drinking the water off moss rocks so she didn't get sick. I mean, she just did everything she was capable of to survive until she could get help. In this next case, a man is left for dead in the Australian outback, and he survives for 70 days. 35-year-old Ricky McGee was driving along the Buntine Highway near the border between Northern Territory and Western Australia in January of 2006. The last thing he remembered was his car breaking down, but he would soon learn the horrifying nature of what happened to him. On that day, it appears that Ricky picked up a hitchhiker and gave them a ride. At some point, this hitchhiker apparently spiked something that Ricky was drinking, and he blacked out. The armed hitchhiker would leave Ricky for dead. When Ricky came to, he realized that he was in a very dangerous situation. He was effectively in the middle of nowhere with nothing to eat or drink, and all he had was the clothes on his back. He knew he had to do something. He would find a dam, and there he would build a basic shelter. At this point, he would catch anything he could so that he could eat. He would catch frogs and snakes and any lizards he could find just to have some calories. Luckily, it was the middle of the wet season, so he had plenty of water to drink. If not, he probably would have died. Eventually, he was discovered by a group of station hands, and they would rush him to the hospital. And when they got him to the hospital, 70 days after his ordeal started, he had lost significant weight. He was about 230 pounds on the day that it happened, and when he got rescued, he was approximately 105 pounds. He would go on to tell the police two different stories. First, he would say that he remembers his car breaking down, and then he would go on to say, "No, wait, I picked up a hitchhiker and they hijacked my car." Of course, the media was a bit split about this. They said, is he telling the truth? What actually happened out there? But medical professionals knew that this man was out there for 70 days. He had lost significant weight, he was dehydrated, he was living off whatever he could find. So somehow, he did end up out there. Police would go out to where Ricky said he was last driving, but they couldn't seem to find his car. In fact, they didn't really find anything. A spokesperson for the police would go on to say, "It has been ascertained that this man spent a considerable amount of time in this area. The investigation so far has found no evidence to suggest any criminal offenses have been committed. Police are still trying to locate this man's vehicle." There are many different stories going around here that we've heard from the police and the media. I don't think it's clear to anyone what happened, and the police investigation is still running. So I'm not sure what happened, but something did happen to this man. He was found, and he was obviously sunburnt, and he was starving pretty much to death. He was dehydrated. He was basically a walking skeleton when he was found. So perhaps somebody did, jack his car, and there was a struggle, and, he blacked out and was left for dead. Maybe his car did break down, but it seems strange that they weren't able to locate his car had it been, broken down. Many people claim that perhaps he was just trying to sell his story, that he willingly went to the outback and survived for 70 days, and that when he came back, obviously everybody was going to be interested and intrigued in the story. They did doubt him because he had, quote, minor drug convictions in the past. I want to say that although somebody maybe made mistakes in the past, that doesn't mean they're necessarily lying in the future. I think it's easy to discredit people if they have some sort of criminal history or mental health illness, and that really isn't okay. Could he have done this for fame? Absolutely. Could he have picked somebody up alongside the road and they eventually stole his car and left him for dead? Absolutely. Could his car have broken down and he wandered off and obviously starved and fought for 70 days? Yeah, totally plausible. I don't think we'll ever know. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.